Nadia, stop studying. I suggest we do some research on how implementation of GST and SST is done in Malaysia. You take SST, I take GST.
A few moments later.
So how? Are you done?
Yes, but first let me briefly explain what SST is. SST has two parts, which is sales tax that is charged in the manufacturing for maybe around 5% or 10%, and the service tax that is charged at 6% to certain services.
Can you share the step or process on how to implement SST?
First, business that must charge SST need to register with the Royal Malaysian Customs Department. Second, they have to collect the sales tax or service tax from their customer whenever they sell goods and provide services that are taxed. Third, every 2 months, businesses must complete a tax form and pay the tax they collected to the RMCD. Last step is RMCD needs to check on businesses to make sure they are following the rules and the right amount of tax to be collected by doing inspections and audits to look at business records. Businesses will face a penalty if they fail to do so.
Now it's my turn to share regarding the GST, or also known as Good and Service Tax. So, GST is a value-added tax system which is applied to a wide range of goods and services at each stages of the supply chain.
Can you share the steps or implementation for GST?
First of all businesses with annual taxable sales over 500,000 ringgit are made mandatory to register for GST to the My GST system, while businesses with sales below 500,000 ringgit have the option for voluntary registration with the condition to remain for at least 2 years in the system. Second, they are also required to issue tax invoices for every taxable sale made within 21 days after the time of supply. Third, businesses were required to file for GST returns. If the output tax exceeded input tax, businesses were required to pay the differences to the government. But if the input tax exceeded the output tax, businesses were able to claim a GST refund from the government. But now I'm curious about the differences between GST and SST.
How about we ask Iman for the differences?
That's a great idea. I'll call her.
Why do you suddenly call me?
Just now, me and Nadia were discussing about the implementation of GST and SST in Malaysia. And now we're curious about the differences between GST and SST. Care to explain it to us?
I can explain it to you guys. I believe both of you already know their definition, right?
Yup, we already discussed. Now, can you explain to us about their differences in terms of rate treatment?
Of course, GST has a standard rate fixed at 6% on the taxable supply of goods and services. SST, on the other hand, has a specific sales tax rate between 5% to 10% depending on the category of good, while service tax is charged at a flat rate at 6% for the selected services.
And how about their tax transparency?
GST is considered high transparency because the amount tax is clearly stated on each invoice on every level of the supply chain. Meanwhile, SST have a lower transparency because the amount tax is included in the price without separate breakdown.
So, does that mean GST is less complex than SST?
No, the GST is more complex because the business must register and issue proper tax invoice. Meanwhile, SST, on the other hand, is more simpler because it applies at a single stage, which is the manufacturer or service provider.
Which tax system give higher revenue for the government?
For that part, I'm not sure because there's debate regarding the issue. I think it's better for us to ask Nilam.
Sure. Thank you so much, Iman.
There you are, Nilam. I have been searching for you for around 30 minutes. I have a question for you. Between GST and SST, which tax system higher revenue for the government?
Oh, really? I'm so sorry, Iman. Just take a seat. Let me explain it to you. So basically, I've read some research made by experts, and I can conclude that GST generates a higher revenue to the government. This is due to its broader tax base, which means that the tax is charged on almost every good at every stage of the supply chain. And compared to SST, the tax is only charged at the start and at the end of the supply chain. So it is obvious that GST will generate higher revenue to the government.
Oh, really? Is there any evidence to support your conclusion?
Of course, there was this statistical research made by the STAR in 2024, and according to the news, over the 3 years and 2 months of the GST system, the revenue reached up to 184 billion ringgit. And while for the SST, even though it has been conducted for over 5 years, the revenue is only up to 150.4 billion ringgit. So it is obvious that GST generates higher value than the SST.
How do GST and SST affect consumer price?
SST can lead to a higher consumer price due to its price build-up, and it is applied at the manufacturing or import stage, and it is not recoverable by business. As a result, these taxes will become part of the production cost, and it will be passed down through the supply chain to the final consumer.
How about GST?
GST, on the other hand, allows business entities to claim back their tax paid. However, while businesses are allowed to claim income tax credit on their purchases to reduce tax burden, the tax reimbursement process is complex and lengthy, which affects negatively upon their cash flow. In some cases, businesses are denied these reclaims. As a result, businesses often pass the additional cost to consumers.
For instance, in the food and beverages sector under GST system, even though businesses are allowed to claim input tax credit, the process of claiming it is administratively complex. So, some businesses choose to pass the cost on to consumers. This resulted in higher selling price for the customer.
Does that mean by using SST, consumer will pay cheaper?
I don't think so, because SLT will result in higher prices. This is because manufacturers are unable to claim tax rebate in the SST system. Hence, consumers need to pay even higher prices compared to GST included with selling price.
I understand it now. Thank you, Nilam and Dina.
You're welcome. Now, Aleeza, why don't you stop filming and join us? I can conclude that GST is more efficient and effective than SST. But why does the government still imply SST instead of GST? What's your point of view?
Okay. For me, the main reason is because of the political pressure. In 2018 general election, Pakatan Harapan manifesting to abolish GST, and they won partly on that basis. Second is because of the negative public perception toward GST. Many consumers felt that they being taxed in every level transaction. Meanwhile, for AST, they felt that they only being taxed in one point. Therefore, AST is more acceptable toward the public perception.
Is there any challenges regarding the small and medium enterprise? I want to give my opinion too. Yes, it seems that SME has the most negative impact since GST has been implemented because their income has been reduced by 20% with their business due to paying for the implementation of GST in their business. On the other hand, SST provide lower compliance costs due to their tax system simplicity.
Then, how about the public acceptance and expectation?
As you know, GST give higher revenue to the country, but the arguments say that if country receive higher revenue, it will lead to the larger government spending. Also, not to forget that GST was charged at 6% flat rate. Therefore, the prices of goods are expected to decrease. However, the price seems to have not decreased as the tax on tax situation sometimes occur under GST when business improperly pass down unrecoverable taxes to consumers.
Thank you, Aleeza, for the enlightenment.
So, Dina and Nadia, how? Did you two get all the answer to your curiosity?
Yes, we are. Thank you so much, everyone.
Sure, most welcome.